나무 묘호랭개교 나무 묘호랭개교 나무 묘호랭개교 Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Hello, everyone. I hope that this finds you in good health and secure. I'm going to shift a little bit here. I don't know how important that is, other than I want to make sure that you're aware that in the playlist, if you go to the home page for this channel and click the little round icon by either at the beginning or in the description, that's the easiest place to find it, and go to the home page, you'll see videos, playlists about so on and so forth, the search, so you can search by search terms in this channel, not all of YouTube. In the playlist, I've had for a number of years now a playlist called Nichiren Gosho. And in that is, for the most part, almost exclusively Gosho Zenshu, those translation entities that participated in translating into English with their own cultural biases, whether it's Japanese or English or whatever translation you may be reading. And there's quite a collection of Gosho. There's hundreds of videos in that playlist. You can play them in order, or you can just hunt around and look for titles that capture your curiosity. However you choose to study, that's up to you. And there are ancillary things of Goshos from here and there. But I decided, before I really buckled down and started concentrating on alternate possible translations, different scholarship of a lot of the same Gosho, but also some that aren't in the Gosho Zenshu, that I would, because there's so many videos in that playlist, I decided to start a second playlist called Nichiren 2, T-O-O. I know, beyond the amateur cleverness of the title, it does distinguish it as scholarship not necessarily shared or completely outside of the Gosho Zenshu translators and entities, right? And so I'm beginning with, of course, the last book that I've been reading from a publication online, which you can find, of a dissertation by Dr. Jacqueline Stone from the late 80s, early 90s, and several translations in there. We just completed that book, and now I'm going to dive more deeply into the scholarship of the Nichiren Shu Overseas Propagation Promotion Association. And they work with certain groups of scholars and translation and a lot of their own internal scholarship from documents that they have either original holograms of or have access to, and their scholarship. A lot of the same Gosho, albeit the titles translated a little bit differently and presented a little bit differently. I mean, if you want to pick up one of these books, that's up to you. There's a great, whoops, can you see that? A great number of cited authorities, starting with Dr. Hoyo Watanabe, former president of Risho University. So I'm going to read, I have a few books from their association. Is that what they? Yeah. And their format of presenting these Gosho is a little different. They like to precede the Gosho with an introduction from their point of view, which I think could be helpful. So I think, unless you guys tell me different, I'm just going to proceed with reading their information because I think it might go well to explore their context, and we might get some insight as to the scholarship, their particular scholarship of the Gosho. And then we'll read their translations of the Gosho, and we'll talk about that. And so hopefully, I mean, I'm sure there's cultural biases in here as well, and I'll try to catch those. But I think it'll be vastly interesting and useful for our practice to get a very similar but an optional point of view that holds Nichiren as a great scholar and a mentor, a teacher of Lotus Sutra Buddhism. I've had to insert that myself in the Gosho Zenshu because they tend to want to go toward the route of deification of Nichiren. But when we read Nichiren's writings, and this is the interesting part that I would like for you also to comment on or notice, is that when you hunker down and read the Gosho, even though you could say, well, that's a particular organization's point of view, the fact of the matter is that after reading hundreds of Gosho with you, or to you, and commenting on them, Nichiren never takes that attitude. And it's really obvious from studying Nichiren's writings, from scholarship, that the point of view of certain sects simply isn't supported by Nichiren's own writings. So I find that vastly interesting. The question has to be asked, how can your sect or your group propose these things as, you know, as a given, as a fact, when in point of fact, none of these hundreds of writings from Nichiren himself ever makes that proposition, ever supports your claim. Aren't you embarrassed? Right? So this is why I keep doing this, and I want to look for any scholarship on Buddhist writings from Nichiren, because I think if you read the writings as their scholarship, albeit tainted by cultural norms, I mean, that's to be expected, the truth just rings out, right? Actually, that's a wonderful thing. How horrible would it be if there was such a huge difference in whoever did the translations that our confidence would erode as to the obvious teachings from the get-go, you know? So I think that's important, and that's why I'm excited to dive into this body of work and see. They're probably very consonant. They probably are very similar, albeit the sectarian politics that use certain scholarship add their own layers of stuff that aren't supported in the documentation. All the more reason for us to study the actual scholarship and not be so hung up on following the person, right? Freaking Shakyamuni cautioned us about that. Don't get enamored by a person, a teacher. That's cultish behavior, right? Because then it doesn't matter what they tell you. It matters that they are the ones telling you. You're not practicing the law, Myoho Rengekyo. You're practicing sycophantism. You're following in a rote, unintellectual fashion. And Buddhism is all about our minds. It's very intellectual, right? So, without further blah, 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 as you've heard me talk on this subject enough, let's start. I just want you to be aware that there's a slightly different format to the presentation. I'll read an introduction of the Shugo Kokaron, which is one of Nichiren's major writings, and then we'll get into Nichiren's actual Gosho. All right, introduction. Nichiren Shonen, 1222 to 1282, wrote Shugo Kokaron in the first year of the Shogun period, 1259, when he was 37 years old. The original manuscript, kept in the Kuonji Temple on Mount Minobu, was destroyed in a fire in 1875. Right away, I'm liking this format because it really grounds us on the starting point to understanding where Nichiren was in his own development as he was making these major writings. Nichiren's purpose in writing this treatise was to extensively criticize the Pure Land teaching advocated by Honen, 1133 to 1212, and make it clear that it was the teaching of the Lotus Sutra alone that offers salvation and ensure peace during the latter age of degeneration, Mappo. Organizing the treatise into 16 sections over 7 chapters, Nichiren denounced Honen's collection of passages on the Nembutsu as an evil work that destroyed the true Dharma, and one that led people into hell while bringing about calamities to the country. The Shugo Kokaron is the only work of Nichiren's with an introduction written by Nichiren and discussion organized in chapters and sections. Interesting. In the opening chapter, Nichiren explains that the teachings of the Buddha expounded in the sutras can be divided into 2, the provisional and the true, and that all sutras, except the Lotus Sutra, are expedient and provisional. The Lotus Sutra alone is the true and supreme sutra. In Chapter 2, Nichiren describes the rise and fall of Buddhism through the 3 ages after the death of Shakyamuni Buddha, the age of the true Dharma, the age of the semblance Dharma, and the latter age of degeneration, maintaining that the teachings of the Lotus Sutra is the most appropriate teaching for the latter day of degeneration. In Chapter 3, Nichiren explains why the collection of passages on the Nembutsu is an evil work that abuses the true Dharma of Shakyamuni Buddha, citing passages from the work as evidence. Nichiren then cites a number of sutras in Chapter 4, including Sutra of Benevolent Kings, the Sutra of the Great Assembly, the Sutra of the Golden Splendor, and the Nirvana Sutra, as proof that slanderers of the true Dharma must be dealt with appropriately. Nichiren argues that the king of a land must take responsibility for chastising slanderers of the true Dharma. Chapter 5 explains the difficulty for those born human beings to meet the good friend. Right? We've studied about the good friend being the person that enables you to encounter Myoho Renge-kyo. Yeah? Whether they're personally a good friend or not, or they're just a temporary association you meet on a bus or a workmate, whatever the situation, the fact that they're enabling your exposure to Myoho Renge-kyo in the context of your liberation, your enlightenment, your seed of Buddha being exposed, they are a good friend. That's I should italicize that, I guess. A dependable religious leader. So they're qualifying a good friend here as a dependable religious leader. So that would be taking responsibility for your practice, like a sponsor, or in Buddhist terms, a bodhisattva. In this case, a good friend, right? And a lot of terminology all equating to the same thing. If you're just starting out here, this is one of the things we've discussed many times, is the rhetoric of Buddhism, right? And the true Dharma in the latter age of degeneration. In chapter 6, Nichiren argues that those who believe in the Lotus Sutra and chant its title will attain the merit of not falling into the 3 evil realms. Remember the 10 realms or the 10 worlds? Hell, the realm of hungry. See, they're using the word souls here, and we know that specifically is not Buddhist. That's that cultural bias I keep talking about, right? So hell, hunger, and animality, or that of the realm of beasts, and we know those are mental conditions, behavioral things, and they're all interpenetrating, right? But when we're at our worst, behaving, and we say it all the time, that guy's a dog, or whatever, or we're displaying animality, and we have moments when we center our behavior there, but it's always shifting, right? 3,000 realms in every single thought moment. But there's a gravitation towards certain realms within realms at any given moment, right? So what Nichiren is saying, again, is that those who believe in the Lotus Sutra and chant its titles, Namu Myo Renge-kyo, will gain the reward body of not slipping into those lower realms, that lesser behavior, because we're using or enlivening our Buddha mind, and it helps us move our tendencies and conditions toward awakening, enlightenment, and therefore makes it more difficult for us to slip into bad habits, if you will. Nichiren further explains that Japan is a land of Mahayana Buddhism and shares karmic ties to the Lotus Sutra. As such, this Saha world, this ordinary mundane world, inhabited by believers of the Lotus Sutra or practitioners of Lotus Sutra Buddhism, is the true perfect land or pure land. Chapter 7, which he argues this, you will understand if you don't already, this whole treatise is about repudiating the other schools and sects and politically powerful groups that are using Buddhism as a method for controlling the populace, establishing superiority, so on and so forth, and in that vein are introducing their own teachings and their own doctrines to manipulate people's understanding of Buddhism. And therefore, in Nichiren's mind, they're poisoning the well, right? So chapter 7 describes the criticisms and accusations leveled by other Buddhist sects, other teachers, other schools, against believers in the Lotus Sutra, and instructs believers how to deal with such accusations. Compared to the Nichiren Lotus theology, produced after Nichiren's exile to Sado, ideas and doctrinal positions stated in the Shugo Kokaron are not as developed. And we talked about this when we read Dr. Jacqueline Stone's dissertation. There's a lot of academic argumentation around how Nichiren's doctrines of Lotus Sutra Buddhism shifted slightly over the period of his life, and a big benchmark of changes in his rhetoric and the way he presented Lotus Sutra are identified with his exiles. Certainly, if you were exiled to a faraway island, stripped of communication and put in a shack and expected to die, really, of starvation, you would have to confront what it is you were doing, how you understood it, and whether or not doubts would fester or your commitment deepen, or right. This would be a very traumatic time period, right? He wasn't sent there for a week; he was sent there for years, perhaps, well, years, again, with the idea that we'll send you to this desolate place, nobody will like you. We're the ones in power, and so you'll be in a desert. You won't be able to feed yourself. You'll freeze. You'll die, and we'll be rid of you. Right? That, in fact, did not happen. But the couple of times that he was exiled were major shifts in his number one, his dedication to what he was doing, his determination, his conviction, right? And his resolve, obviously, to go on. And every time he got out of that situation, was pardoned or was helped to return to the mainland, he felt very vindicated. Like, now I understand how this Buddhism works in actual life. It's not just a theory, right? So obviously his position might deepen in certain areas where he wasn't as certain, and might even shift to be even more confident about his insights and sharing them with his students, right? So that's been identified, and some academicians at first would say whether he always, of course, because he's respected Tendai and Myalo and Dengyo and the lineage of Buddhism all the way back to Shakyamuni, he honored those teachers, but he also understood that he was a teacher of the latter day, of Mappo, and therefore he was starting to identify more and more, looking around Japan. He was the only one that there was a lot of responsibility on him, and that his insights into what his previous teachers had said was gelling all the more for this time period. And so to the degree that he quoted Tendai and original Enlightenment doctrine, and the teachers after that, all the way to the Tendai sect in Japan, which is hundreds of years removed from Tendai, how much of that rhetoric did Nichiren actually lift, in a way, to continue propagating? And how much of it did he develop further in his own understanding? And how much did he rely on those earlier scholarship? These are academic debates that they try to use in order to authenticate writings that they're not sure were actually written by Nichiren, may have been written by one of his stalwart, his six inner monks of his inner circle of disciples, right? Or even later. So there's still a lot of writings that aren't certified. We found a copy of this in Nichiren's hand with his seal. We know he wrote this. And there are others that are obviously written by Nichiren, but part of the document is lost, or there are some that sound like such a different voice. And we talked about this in the Gosho Zenshu. There were Goshos that I was reading to you guys and thinking, man, that doesn't sound like Nichiren, does it? Because after reading so many of his letters, you get a sense for his cadence, the way he develops an argument, the way he states things. Even though he may not changing his mind, so developing his rhetoric around a certain idea over time, as we all do, still Nichiren's voice comes through the way he says things, right? So this is a very academic debate, and I don't want to get into all that with you. It's not necessary for our practice, because, as I've said earlier, the more we read through the writings, certainly the certified, authenticated writings of Nichiren, the message comes through quite loud and clear. So let's finish this introduction. Yes, so I was saying, compared to the Nichiren Lotus theology teachings, I will say, produced after Nichiren's exile to Sado, ideas and doctrinal positions stated in the Shugo Kokaron are not as developed. So this is from early in Nichiren's teaching career. And so this would represent his early forays into establishing the superiority of the Lotus Sutra and the teachings of Shakyamuni, as relate to the people of Japan, the shogunate government, the samurai, so on and so forth. Examples include defining the true Dharma as the establishment of the Lotus Shingon, which I've never read that before, or claiming that the merit accrued by chanting the Daimoku is, quote, not falling into the three evil realms, end quote. Nevertheless, the treatise on protecting the nation, which is what this Shugo Kokaron is an important writing representing early doctrines of Nichiren. So that's a pretty good introduction. I think that gives us a feel for, and it's handy for us as I read through all of the Gosho to know where this particular writing sits in the scholarship of Nichiren, right? We might read something in here and go, oh, I get that, but then we'll read something else and go, well, that seems a little different than what I heard him say before. Well, this would be the reason. He would have developed that thought even further. For instance, saying that the protection of chanting Namo Myoho Renge Kyo prevents us from falling into the three evil realms. That's kind of a shorthand of what we know now from all our study to be a much larger, as I already indicated. We're not just in 10 realms, 10 worlds. The 10 are interpenetrating, and they're part of a larger picture of over 3,000 realms in every single thought moment. It's a fluid thing that's constantly at play. And we're very, we kind of skim the surface of what our mind is doing. We operate as human beings on a very superficial, I don't mean to be hackneyed about that word, but truly, if you're experiencing 3,000 different decisions on doubt, surety, conditions, tendencies, emotions, all of that in every single thought moment, which is a time period we can't even define. How much of those thoughts, how many of those billions of thoughts in every minute are you actually acting on or even aware of? Right? That's the deeper point. And so what we do by chanting, by awakening our ninth consciousness, our Buddha experience, our Buddha-ness, we train those many realms to focus more and more on their enlightened nature, on their profound nature of understanding, and the lower realms that would bring us into doubt or depression or emotional turmoil, right? Stress, anxiety. It's what Buddhism is all about getting rid of. We move away from those. They're there, but we're not as influenced by that. And we're focused more on awakening, enlightenment, seeing how things do work, how things are rewarding experiences, magnificent, instead of worrisome and losing and all of that, right? So, with all of that said, the Treatise on Protecting the Nation, prologue. Now this is Nichiren's writing. Upon reflection, I consider myself fortunate to have been born in the Saha, or human, world, in Japan, and to have unexpectedly escaped the three evil realms, for our chances of being born in the evil realms are as numerous as the number of dust particles in all the worlds of the universe, while our chances of being born in the human realm are as small as the amount of soil on a fingernail. And these are all taken from Sutra, Lotus Sutra stories and previous stories, right? These examples of measurement, time, all of that. Where are we time-wise? Okay. This being said, there is no doubt that in my future life, I will forfeit the rare opportunity of being born a human in Japan to be reborn in the three evil realms. Not sure I understand why he's saying that, but again, this is early Nichiren. Suffice it to say, he's making a point that in the scope of life, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, to encounter a good friend, to encounter Myoho Renge Kyo, to be born with an apparatus that emerges the mind of experiencing Myoho Renge Kyo, being able to awaken Buddha in the mind, is a very rare thing. And we have talked about this before. When you think of life as the entire scope of the entire universe, not just this solar system, not just this planet, not just this neighborhood, but the entirety, it's unfathomable, right? And we then think in terms of relationship, proportion of all of the universe, certainly so far, and even the observable universe that we've been scientifically dissecting for hundreds of years. Although there are close to 8 billion of us humans on the planet, we represent a very, very tiny percentage of all of life. So this is the point Nichiren is saying, is like, realize the importance, the significance of your humanity, and more than your humanity, that your particular humanity has the opportunity to awaken Buddha, because we're a smaller percentage of the 8 billion, aren't we? The causes for human beings falling into evil realms after death vary. So again, the rhetoric is, and I don't know how much of this is cultural influence, but we know that the birth, death of Shakyamuni is about, as Tendai described, happening moment to moment. Birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. There's no reincarnation in Buddhism. That's Hinduism with all of its infinite gods and deities, and Hinduism will make your head spin. Buddhism is very, very earth-bound. It's about living this life to the fullest. So there's nothing before or after, right? We talk about enlightenment being a state attainable throughout beginningless time, without end, not because it's eternity, but because it's a facet, a very fundamental facet of all phenomena. And our particular phenomena of being an apparatus such as a human that can emerge a mind is incredibly significant because it's such a small opportunity. They go to evil realms such as hell for sinful acts committed for the sake of family and relatives, for grave crime of killing living beings, and other brutal acts, for the sin of national rulers, for neglecting the sorrows of the people, for taking refuge in depraved teachings without knowing the right or wrong of Buddhist dharmas, or for being encouraged by wicked teachers. Of those mentioned, even the uninformed are able to discriminate the right from wrong when it comes to the morals of daily affairs. So already, I don't know if you're picking up on this, but the rhetoric, the cultural rhetoric of these translations differs quite markedly from the Gosho Zenshu people that transcribed and translated the writings. So I find that interesting. But once again, the very statement right after he said, after death, he then goes on and describes exactly what I did of this moment, life and death, birth and death, moment to moment instantiation, and how we navigate through them, right? It is not easy, however, even for the enlightened sages to distinguish true from false dharmas and teachers. How much more difficult it is for us, ordinary men, in the latter age. So here he's reintroducing us to the idea of Mappo in this time period of tremendous distractions and tremendous greed and manipulation and foolishness. It's very difficult to stay centered on or even understand what is true, what is real, right? We're living in the age of, who would have ever dreamed a couple of decades ago that somebody could say things like fake news or alternate facts? These kinds of language, they break the brain, right? Buddhism is about reason, logic, this and this, therefore this. But we have a language today, globally, of complete scrambling and destruction of language itself. So here is Nichiren grasping and grappling with that very problem in 13th century Japan. Certainly when it comes to this intellectual pursuit of Buddhist teachings, because you have to remember, there was a lot of illiteracy. We didn't have elementary school and junior high and high school, right? There were teachings on calligraphy and how to learn to write, and those were for privileged few, right? A lot of people were completely illiterate. They were just farmers and tending to their crafts, the mercantile class and the farming class and so on and so forth, right? And look at who Nichiren identifies with, by the way. Ordinary man, just like you and I, right? So again, those personages like Bodhisattva, superior conduct, or Buddha this or Buddha that, these are life conditions. These are mental acuities, attitudes and intent. Ever since Shakyamuni Buddha passed away in India and his teachings spread to China, the light of wisdom exalted by commentators who guided people as four reliances in India daily lost its luster, and the stream of Buddhism in China transmitted by Tripitaka masters grew polluted month by month. Commentators in India who misinterpreted the true sutras covered the moon of truth with clouds of illusion, while translators who attached themselves to provisional sutras, which is something we talk about all the time, right? Changed the jade of the true sutras into the worthless rocks of provisional sutras. How can there be no errors in the sectarian doctrines established by Chinese teachers who depended on those misinterpreted sutras? How much more so in the remote land of Japan, where Buddhist scholars have been guided by the Chinese? He wasn't saying the Chinese people and all of China. What he was showing is a flow of disinformation that often clouded the true jewel of Buddhist self-practice. Even in his early doctrines, he was grappling with this very serious problem, certainly as it was represented in the other 8 schools of Nara, right? There must be more mistakes and less truth in the Buddhist schools of Japan than in China, because it just compounds itself, right? Accordingly, those who study such schools are as numerous as the number of dragon scales, while those who attain Buddhahood are as scarce as those who can gain the giraffe's horns. This is because most either practice provisional teachings or seek refuge in teachings unsuitable to the time and capacity of people in this latter age of degeneration, or blindly practice the teachings without knowing whether it is taught by an ignorant teacher or sage. They're just going through a ritual because that's what we do. Many also practice both provisional and true teachings at the same time without knowing the difference between the two, or practice only the provisional teaching, misinterpreting it for the true teachings, or with conceit consider themselves to have reached higher stages of practice. As a result, ignorant people routinely study and practice Buddhism in order to be free from the chain of life and death, but instead they are accumulating karma, causing themselves to be stuck in the chain. So what does that mean, right? If you set about, and we'll end on this little story here, if you set about learning how to bake, and you want to bake the perfect chocolate cake, and you go online and you search and you find a bunch of recipes, and a lot of them look so complicated, but then this one or two or three show up that are super simple. And they say baking a chocolate cake is just requires food coloring. Just take this vanilla sponge cake recipe and put brown food coloring in it, and there you have chocolate cake. And you go, wow, finally, it's so easy, I'll make myself chocolate cake. Will you ever succeed? Will you actually convince yourself and the others who might partake of your chocolate cake that this is how chocolate tastes? Well, it has a creaminess. Oh, that's the vanilla. Well, how is vanilla chocolate? Oh, it's chocolate. Look at the color. Because you don't even know enough to be critical of the teacher. It might be worthwhile to go and read some of those more complicated recipes and see like cocoa powder or actual chocolate being mixed into the batter, in which case you might actually achieve a chocolate cake. But if you don't know any different, then those complicated recipes just look like somebody's intellectual entertainment, which was often used as a reason to denounce the Lotus Sutra by some of these contemporary schools of Nichiren's time. Yeah. Such is the human animal whose avarice, ego drives us to be superior, to be number one, to be the most liked, right? We see this behavior in little kids, and it shocks us or abhors or entertains us. We have to use wisdom all the time. Buddha mind. Yeah? All right. So we're starting out on a new series of Gosho readings. I, along with you, will encounter these subtleties and these differences, but I have great confidence that we will see through any kind of cultural biases to the actual teachings, doctrines of Nichiren's enlightenment, his actual scholarship, and that will aid us in battling the same kinds of issues. You know, the occasional doubts we feel, where they might come from, how we might be manipulated, not by anyone else necessarily, but by our own tendencies, right? Thank you so much for listening, for being part of this Sangha. Like, subscribe. It helps the algorithms so that we can use this channel as a part of our bodhisattva practice, right? To influence more and more people to seek out their Buddha, the Buddha in their mind, through their mind, to experience the liberation and the amazement of being alive, right? So don't forget the search, the playlist, the website, threefoldlotus.com. There's a lot of free information there on all these key concepts. Not every single one of them, because there's a lot of them, but certainly I've tried to address every fundamental, and every now and again I add a new document because with your help, comments, emails, I think of, oh, this is something probably should do a deep dive on and address. And those documents will show up as videos and sometimes as PDFs you can download on threefoldlotus.com/home/home.htm, which is the core study materials. You get there on the first page, you scroll down a little, you'll see a green button that says core study materials. That page, that linked page, will have like 60 some odd or more links to things like, what are the 5 factors? What are the realms, the worlds, so on and so forth. And of course, the bookstore, the Gohonzon store, please use them to support and deepen your practice. They help support the Sangha, and again, all of our work together, Bodhisattva way. Yeah? That's it for today. I will see you in the next one. In the meantime, be kind to yourself. Excuse me. Be kind to yourself and others. Keep your practice strong. And the podcast, the audio podcasts, right? Don't forget about those. Okay, that's enough, blah, blah, blah. I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.